Which of the following is a major and specific function of the medulla oblongata? And before we dive into all of these choices, let's just review the medulla oblongata. So we're focusing in on this part of the brain. So just imaginary right here for the rest of the brain, but we are focusing in on this bottom section that is part of the brainstem structure. So think of kind of like the stick of a lollipop. So if you've got your stick on the bottom here, and then you have your lollipop on top, the stick is the support, right? So without that stick, that lollipop's going to fall off. So before you could do all of those fun things with the lollipop, lick it and enjoy the flavors and all of that, you need the stick for just the basic support. And that's kind of like how the brainstem works. We need the brainstem to do all of the basic functions to keep someone alive, just basic low-level functions that are very vital, such as breathing and heart rate. Because without these things, we can't be alive, and then we can't go on and do everything else. So this is the bare minimum just to keep someone alive. And then there's also some reflexes involved in the brainstem. So before we dive into the more specific options here that relate to the brainstem and then specifically to the medulla oblongata we will focus in on, let's see if there's anything we could eliminate that's more of that higher level function that is not related to the brainstem or the medulla oblongata. So we see option D says consolidation of short-term memories into long-term memories. So that is a very higher level process. So memories, thought, having that more intellectual experience, that would be much higher level than the basic functions of the brainstem. This is actually more related to the hippocampus section. That's what controls memories. And therefore, we could eliminate option E because that would be way too specific for specifically in the brainstem. Same thing if we take a look at option C here, regulation of body movements. Is that something that the brain absolutely needs to keep the person just alive, just living? No, someone could technically live without any body movement because we're looking at the very basic function of breathing and heart rate. So body movements would be a little bit more complex than what the brainstem functions entail. And in fact, this would be involved in the basal ganglia part of the brain, not within the brainstem, and definitely not specifically for the medulla oblongata, which is the part of the brainstem we are focusing in on, and therefore we could eliminate option C as well. Now we're left with three options. We're left with control of eye movements, we're left with regulation of breathing, and we are left with regulation of body temperature. Now, something about the body temperature, even though you might think, oh, is that kind of more like a basic function of the body? Well, the brainstem could sense if there is a change in body temperature and then send this signal to the rest of the brain to adjust as needed, but that part of the brain that would adjust as needed is part of the hypothalamus and not part of the brainstem itself. So the brainstem would just send that signal, not actually adjust any temperature controls, and therefore we could eliminate option B. Now we're left with two options. We have A, which is the control of eye movements, and we have option D, regulation of breathing. So we know that breathing is definitely something that is part of the brainstem. That's the most basic function that we are focusing in on. But then we also talked about reflexes, certain reflexes, and control of eye movements is that part of the brainstem. And here's the short answer. It is part of the brainstem, but it's above here in the midbrain and not part of the medulla oblongata, which is the area of the brainstem that we are focusing in on this question. So therefore, we can eliminate option A because that is not the part of the brainstem that we are focusing on. We are going to focus in on the medulla oblongata, which does in fact control regulation of breathing, which is what this question is looking for. So option D would be correct in this example.